This is BlueLift, a podcast dedicated to amplifying the underrepresented Democratic voices in Tennessee, working tirelessly to bring progressive change to the volunteer state. Here's your host, Peggy Kingsbury.
That's right. Again, I'm your host, Peggy Kingsbury. And friends, today we have an episode you are really going to love. I think after today, you're going to have learned something about the topic we're going to discuss, and I think you may also learn something about yourself. So my guest today is Heather G. Thomas, and we'll just be calling her Heather. She's a lifelong Tennessee resident, mostly here in the Middle Tennessee area. Heather's an entrepreneur, a wife, and she's a mother of two, a 28-year-old daughter and a 25-year-old transgender son. And transgender is what the topic is going to be for today. We're going to talk about a lot of things around that issue. I'm going to ask some questions that maybe some of you have been wanting to ask, but were afraid to ask, because this is a topic that a lot of us don't understand, but we want to understand more about it. I want to be a better ally for the community, but I need to understand it better in order to do that. And as Heather said to me before we started, only about 30% of us even know someone who is transgender. Or we may know someone and not know they're transgender, right, but who openly know that. So Heather's story to get to the point that she got to today in activism is interesting. She owned a tech company. Is that right, Heather?
I did for 18 years.
Yeah, and then you sold that tech company, and things were beginning to happen in the world that made you decide to turn to activism.
It did. I've been an ally and done a lot of advocacy for about 10 years. For my kiddos. My daughter is also bisexual, and I have 3 stepchildren, and 2 of them are LGBT.
Oh, wow.
So I've done a lot of advocacy, but I haven't gotten into anything political or legislative until a couple years ago.
And when you started your nonprofit, and what's the name of your nonprofit?
Tennessee Moms PAC.
And did you start that with a partner, or you started it on your own?
Well, I was the founder, but the whole idea came from our political consultant, who I met after I testified on SB 1 back in 2023, and he worked for GLAAD as a consultant and asked if our family would do educational advertisements, and we did, and he came to our home, and we really wanted to work together, and a couple of months later, he moved from New York to Nashville, and last November, he said, what do you think about starting something that is really about issues and not necessarily party, and about things that most Tennesseans care about, and things that harm our children and our families. How about we fight back?
Awesome.
And it was perfect timing because I just sold my business, and off we went. There
you go. And that's an interesting path to take to that. Now, before we get into the main topic for today, tell me what are the main issues that Tennessee Moms PAC takes care of?
Okay. Right now, I mean, they can flex as necessary, yeah. but the 4 that really most Tennesseans care about are common sense gun reform. And I've been asked, what do we mean by common sense? And what we mean is bare bones. Background checks, safe storage, red flag laws. Almost all Tennesseans agree with some form of that.
Yes, they do. Yes.
Another one is women's reproductive health and privacy. We all know what we're facing with that right now. Again, the overwhelming majority of Tennesseans believe on some level that there should be, women should have the right to choose, particularly if it involves their own health. Or that rape or incest.
Correct.
And then public schools. We've had a lot of issues with book bans and trying to push vouchers through. My mom's a former Williamson County teacher, retired teacher, and I've just always had a passion for education, but overwhelmingly, Tennesseans do not want vouchers. And the majority don't want book bans either.
That's correct.
And then the final, which may surprise you, is LGBT support. Most Tennesseans, even the majority of MAGA Tennesseans, believe that we should just leave the LGBT community alone.
That's right. Yep, I've seen those studies, and that is interesting. Most people who don't understand the LGBTQ community still say, just, it's not my problem, leave it be.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, and so your work has taken you to some exciting places. I mean, your work has been featured in by CNN, UMC News, and GLAAD. You've done some writing, you've done some speaking, and you've done some testifying in front of legislatures.
Yes.
Interesting.
So much fun.
Yeah. So it's not like Heather sold a tech company and just kind of dabbled in a nonprofit. This is a big deal, and this is active. And the atmosphere that we're living in now continues to give us fodder for things to support, doesn't it?
It does.
Well, let's just dive right in, and I want my listeners to get everything they've come for here today. I want them to get the full bang for their buck. Not that they pay for anything, but anyway, but they can if they want to. I'll give you my Venmo. But let's talk about the transgender issue, and I want to talk to you specifically about your situation with your family, just to lay a foundation for the rest of our conversation. How long have you been married?
31 years.
And when you guys got married and decided to have a child, could you possibly have imagined where you would be today?
Never.
With that, I mean, I think most of us, if we're thinking of having a child, we never consider the fact that that child may need some special gender care later in their life.
Yeah.
With your son, when did you guys first think, there might be something here that's different?
Well, because my son's 25, when he was 2 years old, I knew nothing about, gender dysphoria.
Probably didn't even know what the word transgender was, because basically, I don't know your age group, but I'm 65, and so it was just cross-dressing is what we might have called it,
or sex change, or whatever.
But mainly
drag.
I mean, when I grew up, we didn't even talk about drag. It was just so and so's cross-dresser, and a lot of times it would be like, what's that historical figure that was head of the FBI that they said was a cross-dresser?
I don't know.
No. The guy that they buried under the river, supposedly, in the mob in New York. Hoover, that's right. My producer said Hoover. He's exactly right. That was the kind of talk that so we didn't know about transgender. So tell me how you all sort of came up with all that.
Yeah, so when my son, who was assigned female at birth, was about 2 years old, and we had a birthday party, he opened his package, and there's a pink dress. Throws it over his shoulder.
Oh, wow.
Wants Tonka.
No use for the pink dress.
No use for the pink dress. No use for the dress.
Wow.
Wanted to have trucks. Wanted to play sports. Wanted to play sports with boys. All of his friends were boys. Wanted to wonder, as he grew to 4 or 5, wanted to know why he couldn't go to the bathroom outside. Wanted to know why he had to wear a shirt outside. Just all of the signs were there if I had known what it was. Obviously, we just went straight to butch lesbian.
Okay, so I was going to ask you, what was the conversation you and your husband had behind the scenes about this assigned female, this daughter of yours, being like the ultimate tomboy?
We embraced it. I mean, he was so fun and active and energetic and sure of himself. And we'd let him be who he was. The only thing that I did request and require that I now regret was that when we had something fancy, I got to pick his clothes. And I love to buy matching dresses for my kids. And so that was torture for him every Sunday, and then occasionally when we had to dress up for something else. But other than that,
so when that would happen, there was a fit thrown, there were fights?
Not necessarily, but you could tell how uncomfortable he was. And even I can remember watching him walk down the hall at church, and even though he was wearing a dress, he's,
walking like a little boy.
Yes. And the funny thing is I used to get so angry because when we were out in public, people would call him a boy. And when I'd had people come to me and say, "Ma'am, your son just went in the women's restroom." And I was so mad.
Wow.
I was so mad. But they knew.
Yeah.
The public saw him for who he was.
Did any of your adult friends with other children at the time ever say something to you like, "Man, your daughter, man, she's acting like a boy"?
Only one. Most of the people knew that I was going to let my kid be who they were. But I have a friend that I went to college with who lives in rural Tennessee, and we went to visit her, and we went to Old Navy. And immediately when we walked in the door, he went straight to the boys department.
Yeah.
And she said, "Are you going to let him do that?" I was like, "Yeah, I am. I don't care what he wears. She wears at the time.
Yeah.
I don't care. I mean, I want them to be who they are." And I always had short hair until middle school. And that's a whole different part of the story. But that's, for the longest time, we were just like lesbian.
So middle school was a real sort of a turning point. And,
Tragically.
I don't have children, but I've been one. So I like to say I have on the job experience.
Right.
It used to be where I was never shamed for not having children until here recently.
Yeah.
And they seem to have thrown that into the pot as well. But I know a lot of children. I was a child and I love children. And middle school is hard for every child. It is such a time when, many of the girls are little girls, but also young women at the same time. And they're like secretly still playing with Barbie, but, hiding it and trying to act like they like boys, but they're not sure. And then the boys are going through the whole thing and then hormones start raging. Yep. So talk to us about what began to happen in middle school, maybe to change the family dynamic and also your role as a mother realizing, I've got a situation to deal with.
Well, like I said, in elementary school, he was everybody's friend. All the girls liked him. All the boys liked him. He played with boys. They were his best friends. Again, played boy sports, played baseball, played basketball, and everything was great. And then enter middle school, and all of a sudden the boys liked girls for other reasons.
Right.
And the girls had nothing in common with him. And so he really began to be bullied so much that he almost lost his life multiple times. Almost took his life multiple times.
That's so tragic, and that is also so common for children who are going through gender dysphoria.
It is. And add technology to it, add having a cell phone, which is funny because that's how I made my living for 30 years. And it's also probably the most dangerous thing you can hand a kid.
Wow.
He was catfished in 7th grade. He was bullied constantly, digitally. Also when there's social media, everybody in the school knows everybody's business.
That's true.
It's not, you get an argument with 2 or 3 people and they tell 2 or 3 people and that's the end of it, like when we were kids.
Right.
Now it's, it's just this mass bullying, and it truly was mass bullying. There were probably, and it was mostly the alphas in the school and the athletes in the school who he loved to play sports with. And the funny thing is they would bully, even someone bullied him on, he did start playing girls basketball because he wanted to play at school. And even someone bullied him that was on the team, and instead of, they didn't, because they were such a good ball player, they didn't even, reprimand them. They didn't punish them. They allowed that to happen. And it happened over and over and over again. And our family was the ones, we were the ones that were inconvenienced. We were the ones that had to come get my kid. We were the ones that had my kid sit in the guidance office for lunch, who had no friends. And yet all these kids bullying him en masse, there was no consequence.
Did you feel like the schools didn't want to support you or did not know how to deal with this issue?
Well, surely they knew how to deal with bullying.
You would think, yes.
Because I don't think that was a new issue. I honestly think they're afraid of lawsuits.
Okay.
And I have, further evidence of that when I met with Dr. Looney later on. But
and Dr. Looney, for those listeners who don't know, because a lot of our listeners are from other places,
Okay.
he was the former
superintendent
of our school system here.
Yes. And so, they didn't want to inconvenience. I mean, there were a couple of kids that got in-school suspension, but those kids didn't care. They still got to do their work, and they were out of class, and they were sitting.
And then they were free to continue to bully.
Yes.
That's a shame.
And so it even got to the point where in seventh grade, he did self-harm to the point that he was in at Vanderbilt Psychiatric Hospital. And you just never, ever, ever want to have to, as a parent who's tried to do everything to protect their kids.
Well, of course.
I even read books about how to keep your kid from being abused, physically, sexually, anything. I mean, he was sexually abused on the bus. Camera supported that.
Wow.
Did nothing. He was sexually abused at school. He was verbally abused. He was physically abused. Nothing ever happened other than a slap on the wrist. And I just would not budge. I pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. And they were so tired of me.
But you were pushing out of love for your child.
Out of love for my child, and also out of this isn't fair to any kid.
Right, and out of complete fairness, just the dignity with which everyone deserves to be treated.
Yes, and I grew up in Williamson County schools. We decided to buy a home in Williamson County because I wanted my kids to go to the best schools. And honestly, their experience, neither one of them was what I had hoped for.
So when your child ended up in Vanderbilt after trying to harm himself, was it then that the medical community you began engaging with the medical community, and then a diagnosis of gender dysphoria was given?
No, none of this. There's more to it that led up to this, and really until high school, we didn't know any of this.
Oh wow!
Not until he was 16. But the next thing that happened was after he came out of the hospital, they were supposed to have eyes on him at all times. He was not supposed to ever be by himself. And I found out from him because he told me that for 3 weeks during lunch, he went to the girls' locker room. He could have killed himself.
Wow.
And that's when I pulled, and that was in 8th grade.
Because he just wanted to be by himself. He didn't want to face people.
Yes, and he was, he could have gone to the guidance office. And so that's what really scared me, because that's where he had gone before.
Right.
And I'm like, was he contemplating? What was he going to do? And there were always supposed to be teachers with him. When he went to the bathroom, someone was supposed to go.
I can't imagine the fear of sending your child to school every day, hopefully in the hands of and care of others, and then finding out that care wasn't there, and the whole purpose of them needing care was so that they wouldn't harm themselves. And
right.
you had some assurance that would happen, but then it did not.
Yeah, and I would say it was negligence. I wouldn't say it was intentional.
Right, but nonetheless.
And I was leaving the safety of my kid in their hands.
Right.
And he didn't want to be there anyway. In fact, there were days I pull up to Car Rider to drop him off, and he was just hysterical, and I just kept driving. And so at that point, we decided to pull him out of school and homeschooled him the last semester of 8th grade. And then when that's when I went to see Dr. Looney. And I said, he's not going to go to school with these kids. And middle school had already said, they're not going to let you choose the school he goes to. I was like, hide and watch. And so at that point, I went and visited Dr. Looney and told him what had happened. Actually, one of his basketball coaches had gone, and I didn't even know on his behalf.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because they wanted to suspend players. And
that had to be...
And the administration wouldn't let them.
That had to be amazing, though, for you to hear that, oh, wow, there's an ally in the school.
Well, I only heard it 6 months after. I mean, wow. I didn't know.
Right.
And so anyway, I went and I was very prepared, and I took a notebook of all the bullying and all of the emails that I had sent over the last 2 years at school. And I was like, here it is. I also reached out on a Nolensville 411 and asked other parents if their children had been bullied. And I had 86 instances.
Wow. So
I provided
you have
all
a
of
pattern.
that. I provided all of that when I went. And I just said, I want to make change in Williamson County schools, and I will do it with or without you. And so what I asked for was a bully advisory board. And they started one.
They did, yes.
And I was on it, and we did some good things, but it was quarterly, and it just didn't go anywhere to my satisfaction, because, when you only meet 4 times a year, what can you do?
True.
But at least they did it. And he also gave him permission to choose a school he wanted to go to. And so we chose Centennial, but that ended up being too big of a school for him, and he ended up at Renaissance.
Okay.
Which, for those that don't know, is the art school in Williamson County, but it's also got a very small class size of about 40. And so it's a really good place for kids that don't fit into, your standard size and environment in Williamson County schools.
So your family navigated through all of that, and I know that was very difficult. Now we're at the point of getting a diagnosis and getting some medical treatment.
Yeah, 16, and I really think I credit Renaissance with giving him the courage to come out, because he cut his hair before his junior year, and the first thing that his principal said was, when he saw him the first day of school, was, "Do you want to change your pronouns?" And my son had not come out at that point, and he said no. And but I think that's really
that started
him feeling comfortable with being who he was at school.
But so socially, your child was living as a male by appearances.
Yes, and always has.
And always had. Just had not yet asked those around him to use a different name or to change a pronoun.
Yes, and was very confused about his gender anyway. I mean, he's like, I was born and I've even asked him before. I said, what did you know and what did you think at what age? And he said, well, even from an early age, I knew I was a girl. I knew I didn't have any other options. I knew I wasn't a boy. What was that? What was I? Who was I? I just didn't know.
Right.
And so, yes, we always allowed him to be who he was and comfortable in his skin, but yet still he was having menstrual cycles. And what we did find out is he used to be afraid to go to the beach because of sharks. Well, come to find out, he didn't want to wear a girl's bathing suit.
Oh.
And he hasn't wanted to, and I mean, that's been since he was teeny tiny.
Wow. And
so the good news that we'll get to in a minute, I'm sure, is, after transition, what changed. But there were just so many hard things when you look back that we could have made easier on him if we had known.
Well, but you didn't know. You're walking a path that you'd never walked down before, and everyone is learning,
right?
Him included.
Right. And my husband and I are very different. He's Upper East Tennessee. He's 10 years older than me. He's a 20-year veteran, raised Southern Baptist, didn't leave rural East Tennessee until he joined the military. So very closed-minded, conservative, and I was polar opposite. So there was a lot we had to unpack with that as well.
I'm sure, because his background is not very different from mine. I didn't serve in the military, but grew up very similarly. And when you don't have anything in your background to teach you how to deal with something that seems different than what you're used to, you go through a learning process.
Right.
Now, I know from doing my research, there was an instance where your husband took what he then saw as his daughter to an auto parts store. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so my son's car needed to be worked on. We went to the mechanic, and we've known this mechanic for years, but never taken our kiddos there. And so my son goes, they take it to get worked on, and my husband calls my son she. And the mechanic just looked up and was like, who
are you talking
about?
I see your boy here.
Yes. And I think that was like an aha moment for my husband to say, oh, the rest of the world really does see him as a boy. And so that was kind of step one. That was his senior year. And we really struggled for a year up until that. And he even said, I don't know if I can deal with this. I'll give it a year. And that was one moment. And then another moment was when he was about to graduate and we started going to all these senior programs and everybody was, treating him like a boy, calling him him, accepting him for who he was. And what it came down to eventually was I said, what would you do if we were out in public and somebody, bullied him? He was like, I'd rip their head off. And I was like, you love your kid.
Yes.
He said, I do love my kid. I just don't know if I can handle this. And I was like, well, what is the biggest thing you can't handle? And he said, the pronouns. And I said,
interesting.
Okay. It's a word to you and me. It's validation to him. It's I love you to him. It's I see you. I respect who you are, even if I don't understand it or agree with it.
Oh, wow.
And so at that point, he really started trying. And, I'm a person that if I don't know something, I try to research the heck out of it. And he's also one of these people that because of the way he was raised and religiously and all of that, he's just like, I don't agree with it, but he also wasn't going to do his research. And so the one thing I did ask him to watch was there's a documentary series called Through the Wormhole, and Morgan Freeman narrates it. And it was about gender. And it was about the history of gender. And there are actually some islands, and I should have researched this before I came today, but there's some islands where children, when they are in prepubescent, are one gender, and then they grow testicles after they turn 12.
Oh, wow.
And so there is science and history, and my husband's also part Native American, and two spirits is very common in that society, in that they've always embraced people that were transgender, and they call them two spirits, and they were very honored because of their wisdom to be able to be.
Oh, wow.
To see both.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so I started really trying to get him to see that and embrace that. And again, I don't know that he understands it or agrees to it to the degree that I do, but he loves our kid. There
you go. And I love what you said about the pronoun, because sometimes the universe just lays things out in a certain way, and we're taping this interview today when this topic is just top of mind for a lot of people for several reasons. One is you have a U.S. Congressperson, Nancy Mace, bullying another congresswoman who is transgender. Mm-hmm. And she, Nancy Mace and some of her cronies, Marjorie Taylor Greene, etc., refuse to use the correct pronoun mm-hmm. When they're talking to this congresswoman and about her. And I love the way you said that. You said it's not. It's just a word to us, but to them, it's I see you as a human being, and I'm going to respect you.
Yes.
And to me, those are Christian values. But
Absolutely.
so often, it's all right to bully certain segments of our population if you're a Christian. And I just don't understand that. It's just bullying, and it's hatefulness. It's bigotry.
It is, and it's been politicized so much. This should not even be a topic in politics right now.
Right.
It's been politicized. There's so much false information. In fact, I saw a video of Jack Johnson standing on Supreme Court steps yesterday, and what's his name? The House
William Lambert.
Yes, William Lambert. And both of those fellows sponsored bills that I testified against. the SB1, which is actually the bill that
the
is
Supreme Court
before the Supreme Court.
And I want to
Yeah.
set this up for our listeners so that those of you who are not here know. And this is not just a Tennessee specific issue because it's up before the Supreme Court, and it's an issue that's coming to a state near you, I'm quite sure. But so here in Tennessee, we have a couple of we have a supermajority in our legislature, which means it is run by one party, and that party here is the Republican Party, and they are very, very far right Republican. And they decided to, I'm trying to remember back in history why the transgender issue even became a thing that we talked about, because it's not like it's something new, but somehow it became one of those hot button issues. And so they decided to come up with a bill that said that hormone therapy and medical gender care is basically against the law in the state of Tennessee for minors. And I'm assuming they mean anyone under 18 years old.
Under 18. Mm-hmm.
Now, I want to ask you some questions, Heather, that may be on the minds of many of our listeners. So when we talk about what a parent might seek medically for a child who has gender dysphoria, my understanding is that you can't just get a teledoc to give you a prescription for some hormones for your kid.
No.
It's so involved.
Yeah.
And in your case, I believe that it is sort of a typical case. There's counseling involved, medical doctors, endocrinologists. I mean, it's a long process, isn't it?
Yeah. And really, doctors won't even talk to you about it unless kids have been in therapy for a year. Because they're really, the therapists are probably the best people to diagnose the dysphoria and whether or not this is really what it is, or if it's something else. And, lots of kids experiment with how they dress and how they do their hair and if they want a tattoo or a piercing. But This is something completely different. And so it's really important that they're the professionals to figure out if this is real or not.
So, and again, I'm going to ask questions that I think might be on the minds of other people. When you say a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, so essentially what we're saying is that there is an accepted medical diagnosis for someone feeling that their gender assigned at birth is not what they feel in their body.
Right.
And how they want to present and who they are.
Yes, and there's a difference in sex and gender.
Correct.
Sex is the parts you were born with.
Right.
Gender is how you identify. That said, there's such a spectrum because you and I are on different ends of the spectrum probably, or we may be similar in how feminine we are.
Oh, listen. I totally get that because I'm gonna give a truth bomb to my listeners. So, I'm a female and I'm comfortable being a female, but I don't like to cook. I never learned to sew.
Same.
I really don't like messing with my hair and my makeup all that much. Mm-hmm. I do it, to keep the general public from seeing something too scary.
Yep.
I don't like a lot of frou-frou stuff. I don't like ruffles. I don't like sparkles. Yep. I wouldn't say that I dress in a way that's unfeminine, but I'm just not some of the typical things we think of. And I have friends who are way far the other way.
Right.
Every sparkle you can get, they want it. Every ruffle, they're redoing their dining room table for every season. And I'm very practical about things, so I completely understand about what you're saying. There's a continuum.
Yes.
And so this medical care, I think that is sort of one of the things that got this bill, that got some gas behind this bill. Of course, we have the Vanderbilt system here in Tennessee, which is the major medical system here. And I don't really know who decided to start publicizing really untruths about what Vanderbilt does for gender care. But they do have a specific division, right, that deals with adolescent gender care.
And honestly, I actually served on a community advisory board for LGBT health at Vanderbilt a few years ago. And Vanderbilt, next to San Francisco, a hospital in San Francisco, had the best LGBT care in the country. And so that it makes sense to me that would be a place that a supermajority that's far right would want to attack.
And so when we talk about the kind of care that Vanderbilt delivers, and I'm just going to say this because I think that there are a lot of misconceptions out there about that. Nobody is taking a 15-year-old kid up to Vanderbilt and saying, do surgeries.
No.
That's not what that is. That doesn't happen.
No.
I think Vanderbilt even said when they testified before the legislature that they might have done one surgery in like 6 years,
and it was a 16 to 18-year-old.
Yeah,
so it wasn't a young child.
It was
No.
And conversely, by the way, if you had a 17-year-old daughter with a big old nose and wanted to get her nose job, nobody would have a problem with that. Or if you had a 17-year-old girl who wanted breast implants, people around here would do that all the time. That's gender care.
And it's okay.
Yeah, and it's okay.
And even Bo Mitchell tried to add into an amendment to the law about gender-affirming care that if you can have surgery for gender-affirming care, you shouldn't be able to, as a minor, to have any kind of cosmetic surgery. And that was voted down.
Right.
So they were plainly saying it's okay to get a nose job. It's okay to have breast augmentation. It's okay if you're an overweight male with breasts to have breast augmentation. That's gender-affirming care, if anything is.
Sure it is.
But it's not okay if you've been diagnosed with gender dysphoria.
Right. And so while that was, I think a lot of people tried to major on the minor. They tried to act like, well, the bill is to keep some of these crazed parents from taking their kids and having parts cut off. Mm-hmm. And that's not really what the bill says. The bill says basically that hormone therapy, you just can't do that for a child in Tennessee. And so I want to talk briefly because I really want to get to your testimony and you're talking with some of our legislators, but I want to sort of lay a quick foundation about what this hormone therapy does and what it's for. Now, my understanding is that when a child who has gender dysphoria begins to go through puberty, that there are medications that can slow that down.
Yes.
Okay. And then once that's slowed down, it takes like a while, right? Then they can actually get the hormones that might help them develop into the gender that they are living.
Yes. So first of all, with gender dysphoria too, it's not just a psychological thing. There's a lot of science that backs this, and all of the major medicals support this, that this is a medical thing. It could be hormonal. You see some female basketball players that you can tell they have more testosterone than others.
Yes, you
That
can.
doesn't mean they're transgender, but they have more testosterone. So it can be hormonal. There's also some evidence that may be in the DNA of the mother. There's other evidence now coming out that it may be akin to neurodiversity. And so, neurotypical children, like autism. And so there are so many medical connectors that haven't completely been made, but there's it can be brain, it can be DNA and chromosomes, hormones. And so it is a medical thing. And not treating it is where you get to the mental health problem. And so I'm not sure I answered your question.
That makes no. You are helping that. You're helping explain that to all of us. That's interesting, and you are right. I think anybody would have to admit that we all know men and women who, you can just tell some guys got a lot of testosterone. Mm-hmm. They seem to be leading our country right now. But yes, we know the type. And then others are a little more soft, and that's cool. And women are the same way. And many of your female athletes, you can tell they just wired up a little bit different, and good for them. Go girl,
Yes.
Yes. So that's an interesting point to bring out. And so the bill that the legislators decided to pass basically says that there cannot be any gender-affirming care at all. And as luck would have it, the Supreme Court actually is taking this case up because many legal scholars said that bill is discriminatory, and that's more than just about a woman using the men's restroom or vice versa, or even, the whole sports team issue that we've had, a transgender person on a sports team. But this bill is really about just that care. And it went to the Supreme Court. And interestingly, and I won't get into the weeds on that, but I've done a lot of reading on it. I think the reason that they took it up was not just because it's a hot button issue. It's rare that the Supreme Court has an issue before it that also is at that very moment a very hot button social issue. But this moment in time has converged. And so they're hearing this case when it's really an issue that a lot of people are talking about, and people are bringing a lot of other things into it, who uses what bathroom, who plays on what sports team. But the bottom line is the state of Tennessee is discriminating against transgender individuals based on their sex, and the U.S. government has taken the other side that it is against the Constitution to do this, and that's kind of what they're going to be talking about. Now, yesterday the case was presented. And if any of the listeners are interested, you can Google it. You can hear many of the arguments and questions by the various justices. And I listened to quite a bit of that. Now, to get, less academic, for many of us in Tennessee, it just looked like the Bigotry Roadshow was on, because who showed up in D.C. but, State Senator Jack Johnson and State Senator William Lamberth. I guess he's House Representative William Lamberth. And those two sponsored the bill. And then I think Governor Lee also decided to take a ride up there as well. Yeah. But and some of the things they said out in front of the courthouse really bothered me. They are not ashamed to display their feelings about this and even speak some untruths. Again, they want to make it like we have parents in Tennessee who are forcing their children to get surgeries for things that they don't need. I mean, it's just absurdity. And every case that you hear about where a family is dealing with a child who has gender dysphoria and is transgender, they go through, just like your family, so many steps before even hormone therapy is considered.
Yep. Therapist, primary care doctor, psychiatrist, endocrinologist, surgeon. I mean, all of them have to get on board.
Right.
And again, you have to have therapy for a year before the doctors will even talk to you about it.
And so we have legislators opining on something they really know very little about. Yes. None of the people who sponsored this bill are medical doctors.
No.
And to my knowledge, I don't think there were any medical doctors even in the situation when you testified. So you wound up being a real advocate for your child, and as part of that, you paid a visit to State Senator Jack Johnson.
Yes. So prior to the bill even coming out, that was October of 2022. I was seeing all of this Vanderbilt scuttlebutt and knew something was coming.
Right.
And so I decided, and I've never done anything like this before. I was scared to death, but I was like, I have to do this. I decided, and my son was not a minor anymore, but I took a friend and a couple of friends of mine who have non-binary children who are minors, and I took them with me. And we met with him in October, and about our concerns about the bill, and asking him to please, do his homework, really pay attention to what's going on. And so as we entered, he was very kind, thankful for us being there, said, I really don't think that we're that far off in what we believe. He said, after he talked to us, he said, you can tell you all are very caring, good parents. I have 3 children of my own. I don't know what I would do if they were in that situation. We talked about the mental health repercussions and how transgender children are 80% more likely to attempt suicide than straight cisgender children. And that's already high.
Right.
And so he said, mental health is at the top of our priority list for our adolescents and kids. And I was like, I'm happy to hear that. And so what I sort of walked away with from all of that was that maybe they would ban surgeries, and I could live with that. I mean, I don't think anybody wants your reproductive system to be tampered with until you're an adult and can decide if you want to have children.
Right.
But that wasn't what was happening anyway. If there was any, it was top surgery.
Right.
But the most important thing was the hormone blockers to slow down, so that kids can really figure out who they are, which are reversible and used for other things. And then hormone therapy, if that's necessary. And so he listened to me. I went in with all this research. In fact, I probably helped him unknowingly. I was very naive and thought you can reason with these people. And so I asked him a lot of questions, and he said, those are really fair, difficult questions. I have an election coming up in November. Please come back after that, and I'll answer them.
Okay. So, and I do want to just catch something that you said when you talked about the hormone therapy and it being reversible, but mainly that it's used for other things. So there are cases where a young boy, for example, may begin to go through puberty much faster than his peers, and he's beginning to get hair on his legs, and his voice is deep, and he's only 8. And it's not unheard of for parents and for a doctor to say, we need to slow this down a little bit. For some reason, your kid is kicking into puberty a little bit too soon. There's something we can do for that. Let's slow this down some.
Yeah, or a daughter who's probably about to start their period at 10.
Right, and they can, and it's not unheard of for there to be some things to give a child to help slow that down. Yep. Nobody seems to have a problem with that.
No,
not at
all.
So Jack was okay before the election, and you thought it was a decent enough meeting, and he listened to you. So he gets reelected, and you go back.
I go back, and this time I take 2 Belmont professors, one in psychiatry and one in sociology.
Okay, and Jack took the meeting.
He took the meeting. And I walk in the door, and the first thing he says to me is, your people are being terrible to me. And I say,
who are your people?
Who are my people?
Yeah.
And I didn't say, are you surprised? Because you just had this rally 2 weeks after you and I talked and completely, slaughtered them publicly with Marsha Blackburn and Lamberth all on the steps of the Capitol. Or is it because you just put forth 34 bills against them? I mean, what do you expect from the LGBT community? I didn't say that, but I made it clear that I didn't know who my people were. And I said that I didn't do that. And he's like, well, you didn't, but they did. I was like, okay. And then it kind of went downhill from there. So I started going back through the questions, and he got very angry. He would not answer them. And he started going down this path of doing what's best for the children, protecting the children. But then when we would kind of sidebar, he would say things about parental rights. And I said, accept. And he didn't follow me.
Right.
But his aides sitting there got it. And he got very angry and in my face when I said that. I said, so you're saying parental rights are so important for all of these other things. Mental health is so important for all of these other things, except in this situation. And at that point, he didn't even let the psychiatrist and the sociologist talk about mental health and the damage that this does to the kid's psyche and how hard it is on them emotionally anyway, just trying to figure out who they were. And so he's just very, very hateful.
So he had experts there, right there, willing to talk with him, and he didn't care. Didn't want to hear it.
No. And, he was quoting all of this European stuff. And the European research really is not, what he was quoting was misrepresented. And every major medical association believes that this is appropriate care. Endocrinology, pediatric, American Medical Association, American Psychiatric Association, all of them. And
the whole European issue came up at the Supreme Court yesterday because there's been an untruth going around that European countries have banned transgender care.
Yeah.
Well, that's not true at all.
Right.
and it's interesting when you read what the European countries have done, it sounds like they had the care available, but there were very few medical standards. Now they've said, well, a child needs to have therapy. The parents need to be involved in some family therapy for the child. There needs to be medical doctors opining on this. They need to have, a certain amount of therapy sessions for a period of time. Exactly the things that we already do here.
Yes.
So all Europe did was add that to their laws or rules before a family can get these hormone blockers for someone who's not yet 18. They go through these steps that we already go through. So this whole rumor that they've banned it in Europe is not true.
It is not true. And, these guys are not dumb.
No.
They know this is a real thing.
Yes.
They also know that there is not a parent on the planet who would wish this on their kids.
Well, and that's an interesting point that you bring up because it is a very hard thing to have to deal with. I mean, the way you've described it today, your whole family was immersed in helping your child not unalive themselves.
Yes.
And also trying to figure all this out as a family. Why would anybody in their right mind wish that upon themselves?
No, and I knew the discrimination there was going to be. In fact, when he was, when he first told me he thought he was trans, I kind of talked him out of it because I was like, you know what that means.
Right.
And I wish that I hadn't, but it was fear.
Sure.
How much worse is this going to be than being gay already is?
Yeah, you don't want your child to feel pain.
Yes, and so there's just not a parent on the planet that would wish this on them. And if there is any indoctrination, that is child abuse. And but that's just not what's happening.
Right.
And
no, I mean, I don't think there's ever been a case anywhere where someone has said, these parents talked their child into doing this.
No, I mean, my child said he would rather be anything than that.
Of course.
And now he's like, I'm a man. I'm not a trans man. I just want to live the life of a man.
Just live and be happy. And,
yes.
And, my thing is, why should that bother anybody else?
Yeah, exactly. Well, the other thing, too, is the Supreme Court, the families that sued, none of them had surgery on their list. So what we're trying to overrule is not surgeries.
Correct.
It is only gender blockers and hormones. And yet they still continue to politicize the surgery. In fact, I might be wrong, but I think they were talking about that yesterday on the steps of the Supreme Court. And it's not about surgery at all.
No, I mean, and the absurdity of it is, we've gone to the point where actually the person who was elected president actually said, a child goes to school a girl and comes home a boy.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. I mean, it can be more ridiculous.
It's completely ridiculous, and everybody who can even figure out how to listen to a voice over the airwaves knows that that's ridiculous, but it's so inflammatory. And then this whole thing about surgery is not at all what the case is about. And we can hope that the Supreme Court justices understand that this is really a legal question, which, of course, that's why they're hearing it. They're not really making a ruling on a social issue. It just affects a social issue. But they'll be deciding whether or not there is discrimination. I don't know how it's going to go. I don't know that many of the legal scholars who looked at how the justices asked questions yesterday, who asked what, they really don't have a feeling yet for how it might go. It just depends on which legal way they decide to look at this issue.
Yeah.
But it could have very far-reaching tentacles because I think there are 23 states now that have something similar to what Tennessee did. And one of the things that's really interesting, and I hope that some of the listeners will go down the rabbit hole and learn and read more about this, but the two families who sued, their story of all that they went through with their child is so similar to yours. It's not just, our kid got up one day and decided, she didn't want to wear a dress anymore.
Right.
And, let's just make her a boy.
Yeah,
it was a decade of work and doctors and, talking about it, learning about it.
Yeah.
Pain and bullying.
Yes. Well, and one other thing I did want to mention about Jack Johnson is that when I did testify, he came in with an amendment. And after he told us what fantastic parents we are, he added child abuse to the bill.
So now let's explain that for the viewers. So the bill originally said no gender blockers, no hormone therapy if a child is under 18.
Or surgery.
Yeah. Which is not really an issue, but let's say that.
Yes.
And it didn't say anything about the parents who do take a child for that is child abuse, but he added an amendment that says...
Yes, after he told me what a great parent I was.
Is that amendment still part of the bill?
No, and you know what? I believe the reason that he added it is because he didn't want any parents who had minors to testify, and many of them did not.
Because they were afraid. I'll be charged with child abuse.
Yes. There was a perfect witness who wanted to testify, who's a parent who was in law enforcement, who was pretty high in law enforcement, who was a white male, who could have really had impact.
Yes.
And they had to back out.
Wow. And so
to protect their kid.
When the bill was passed, it does not have the child abuse section in it.
It does
right?
not. They pulled it after all these people pulled out of testifying.
Wow.
But what an insult. For you to sit there and tell me
it's a horrible insult.
What a great parent I am. And then you when I'm sitting there looking at you, you call, and I really wish I wish I'd known then what I know now, and I probably would have ad-libbed a little bit of my testimony to address that. But it was my first time, and I just wanted to get all my words in the amount of time I had. I
watched the tape of it, and you did an amazing job, and it takes a lot of bravery to do that, and it's makes me, a bit ashamed of how our legislators act when you have them doing things like that are just underhanded and sneaky, and to think that they would even dream of charging someone with child abuse who's only trying to help their child, and
they
also
know it's not.
Well, of course they do, and then all of a sudden, also they are making these decisions. They have zero medical background.
Well, and that's the scarier thing about the Supreme Court decision is that it's not just about being transgender. It's about how now medical doctors are being legislated on how they can diagnose and care for people.
Yes.
And, that ties to abortion and women's rights and all kinds of things. But this is not just a decision that will impact the small percentage of people that have transgender children. It will be far-reaching.
That's true. And it is an interesting juxtaposition between parents' rights to take your child to the school they want to go to, and then, of course, telling me and my tax money we have to pay for that.
Yes.
Or, no, you don't have rights as a parent in this case.
Yes,
so
exactly.
It's a real battle. Well, wow, Heather, we're going to have to probably have episode number 2.
Okay.
When
I'm willing and ready.
Yeah, when the decision comes out. I don't want to stop the discussion today without letting people know where they can go to get more information about these issues and to learn about your nonprofit and to learn about you.
TennesseeMomPAC.org, which is TNMOMPAC.org. We're also on Instagram and Facebook, and soon to be Blue Sky. There's information to donate. There's information about the issues that we support, ways to get involved, volunteer. The first year, we really put our efforts towards getting people elected, and we know how that went in Tennessee. But now our focus really in the immediate future is how do we attack the legislation and keep them from doing any more harm. And so if you'd like to get involved with that, we're going to need people to show up for different issues. We're going to need people to testify. We're going to need people to just push back in any way that they can, reach out to their legislators, whether it's an email or a postcard. There's so many ways you can get involved without having to stand up and testify.
Correct. TennesseeMomPAC.org. And I will tell you, it's a great website. And there's a clickable link there to watch Heather testify.
Yes.
You can watch the entire thing.
Yes.
And learn about this issue. I want to just implore the listeners, before you draw a conclusion, before you finalize your opinion on it, do a little research and learn about it. And then always, I hope that people will land, even if they say, you know what, this is an issue. It's just too weird for me. I don't get it. I don't really get that. That's okay. Just remember, everyone deserves to be loved and respected and seen for who they are. And we always say here at BlueLift, every voice deserves to be heard. Yeah. And when it comes right down to it, I hope that people will just land at that spot. If they aren't willing to learn more about it and be a true ally, just don't stand in the way of people being respected and loved.
Yeah. Can I say one more thing?
Yes, you can.
This is you will never find a person more brave than a transgender child, because they're willing to risk it all to be themselves. And my child is one of the bravest people I know. He has a very difficult life. He will always have mental health issues probably, but it isn't because of who he is. It's because of how the public sees him and treats him.
Wow.
And so for him to say, I'm going to risk it all to be me, I can't think of a more beautiful thing.
Oh, what a wonderful way to end this today. Thank you so much for that. And thank your son.
Thank you.
And tell him that I love him.
Thank you. And I love the transgender community. They all go through a very similar set of circumstances, and I'm always here to support. So reach out to me on Tennessee Moms PAC if you need resources or support in any way.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here, Heather.
Thank you so much.